So, why is the prayer meeting important? Why is praying corporately so necessary and so vital? Before I answer that question, I want us to just take a look at reality for a second. It is by many the estimation of the church in the West and the church specifically in America that for a large percentage of the church is in rather an anemic state. It's in an unhealthy state. We are seeing a decline in churches that are actually not growing but decreasing. There's an overall nominalism and coldness in congregations. In fact, many people will look at the modern day church and they'll say, well, Jesus said in the regarding the church of Laodicea in Revelation chapter 3 that they're neither cold nor hot, they're lukewarm, and that is the same condition today for the church in America. And they'll say, well, what is wrong? What do we do about it? And they'll look at and say, well, is there a method or a methodology that we can adopt? Or is there a strategy that we can implement or a program that we can start up that will bring vibrancy and health back to our churches? Well, the reason why we are seeing a level of deadness within our congregations or a level of coldness in our congregations is because we have largely abandoned or have undervalued the importance of the prayer meeting. Churches will either have abandoned the prayer meeting altogether. They'll say, well, it wasn't, we don't have enough resources, or it was never well attended, so it's just really not worth our time, and they chuck the prayer meeting out the window. Or if a church does have a prayer meeting, the prayer meeting has degenerated into something that doesn't even look like a prayer meeting. It looks more like a 45-minute gossip session. So they'll spend 45 minutes with prayer requests, which resemble more gossip, or they'll present superficial prayer requests like, please pray for my neighbor's, uncle's, cousin's cat who got stuck in a tree. They'll spend 45 minutes doing that, and then maybe 15 minutes at most actually praying. The prayer meeting is essential. It is one of the foundational, fundamental things that a church can do. We see in the book of Acts, peppered all throughout the narrative, prayer meeting after prayer meeting after prayer meeting. Now, people will say, well, the book of Acts is an extraordinary account. It isn't for today, which I disagree with that. I think that's a false assumption. There are things within the book of Acts that can be applied to today, specifically the prayer meeting. And you see all throughout the book of Acts, brothers and sisters gathering together in prayer. Acts chapter 2, prayer meeting. Acts chapter 4, prayer meeting. Acts chapter 13 and 14, prayer meeting. Acts chapter 20, prayer meeting. I think there's 13 times in the book of Acts where there's examples of brothers and sisters gathering together in prayer. So again, the prayer meeting is essential. In fact, as I said before, it is one of the fundamental aspects of church life. What do we see in Acts chapter 2, right after Pentecost? We see the brothers and sisters, the early believers. What do? They gathered together, they were devoted to the apostolic teaching, and they were devoted to prayer. Again, when you look at the assessment in our culture today, you see an absence of prayer which directly correlates with a decline in church health. Any Christian who doesn't have a prayer life is a very sick Christian. They don't have the communion with God if they're not praying. Well, I ask you, how can a church have communion with God if they don't pray corporately? And prayer is one of those wonderful things that's just a real blessing to do. In fact, Charles Spurgeon, who was the prince of preachers, who preached to thousands upon thousands in his ministry, when visitors would go to his church, he wouldn't show them the sanctuary. He wouldn't show them his great library of books. Do you know where he would show them first? He would take them down into the basement, and he would show them where brothers and sisters were praying, where they were lifting up their voices, crying out to God for God to move on their behalf, to bless the church and to strengthen the ministry there. And Charles Spurgeon would say to his visitors, he would say, "This is where the power is." Now, if you know anything about Charles Spurgeon's ministry, he was a very powerful preacher. In fact, he was called the Prince of Preachers. But for him, he knew where the power was. It wasn't just in oratory skill. It wasn't even just in Bible knowledge. But it was found chiefly in the prayer meeting. You see, if we indeed want to see revival, much talk about revival within churches today, but if we want to see revival, all we need to do is look back, yes, in the scriptures, but all we need to do is look back in history. There was something rather distinct in the first, second Great Awakenings and all the revivals that preceded that came after it. For example, the revival in Wales in the early part of the 20th century. What was the distinguishing mark? An emphasis on prayer. An emphasis on prayer. A group of believers crying out to God for him to be merciful, for him to be gracious. A desperate need for more and more of the Spirit being poured out. You see, the prayer meeting is important because there is needs in the church today. We need more of a gospel proclamation. We need more of power from the Spirit to go out and to reach the lost and to see transformation in people's lives. We need more communion with God. And I ask, how are we to achieve it? It doesn't just happen by magic, nor does it happen by just simply wishful thinking. It happens by when brothers and sisters stand on praying ground and they pray together corporately. So, closing exhortation to those who are watching this. Believer, if your church is one of those churches, one of those rare churches that actually have a substantial prayer meeting, where it isn't just a gossip session, but these brothers and sisters, these believers are actually united in their intention to cry out to God with all their might, their intention to pray, you need to go to that prayer meeting. Why would you ever want to miss out on a tangible experience of experiencing the presence of Christ? Why would you miss out on an opportunity to lift up your voice and to pray for a need and have brothers and sisters pray in agreement with you and for you? Why would you ever miss out on an opportunity to not be able to bless someone and pray for them in their time of need? The Bible is clear. It says we can approach the throne in confidence, the throne of grace boldly in our time of need. Secondly, if your church doesn't have a prayer meeting, prayerfully approach and humbly approach your pastor and leadership. And just ask them, what do they think about prayer, and is the prayer meeting essential? And they might say, well, we've tried praying corporately and nobody showed up, or, we don't have the resources. Then, pray about maybe saying to your pastor, say, look, I'll facilitate it. And if they're still not open, start a prayer meeting in your house. Gathering together with other brothers and sisters who consider prayer important, and pray. Pray for your church and pray for the needs that are represented there. And lastly, church, pastor, if you're listening to this, if you do not have a consistent prayer time or prayer meeting where you can give your people an opportunity to pray corporately, start one. I guarantee you in your congregation there are needs. I guarantee you that in your congregation there are people who need God to move in their life. And I guarantee you, Pastor, that there's a desire in your heart to see your church grow spiritually and to see the power of God move on behalf of your people. One cannot look on the church today, and one cannot look at the deadness of our culture, not hope for revival. Pastor, I ask you, how is that going to happen? If not God's people, if they won't pray. And so, Pastor, lead your people. Start a prayer meeting. It might not be the most popular. It might not be the most well attended, but it is, I would say, the most necessary of endeavors. You know, we need to rest on the promise that God has for us when we corporately pray. He says, seek me and you will find me if you seek with me with all your heart. He also says that in Jeremiah 33 that, call unto me and I will answer you. And I will show you great and mighty things thou knowest not. The prayer meeting is essential. The prayer meeting is necessary if we want to see a true Spirit-led revival in our churches today.